celebrating la Settimana della Lingua Italiana nel Mondo, but we are especially celebrating this event with Dr. Konrad Eisenbichler that has really a lot of people interested in. So I'm looking forward to hear the talk. Of course, Professor Eisenbichler is a great scholar, and I leave my colleague the task to introduce him because she's also a medievalist and a Renaissance studies scholar. So I think that's nice. But I'm from Friuli Venezia Giulia, and I'm very, very, very happy for this event.
Okay.
Thank you.
So yeah, thank you everyone for being here, and thank you for joining us today at the University of Calgary. So welcome to the University of Calgary. I would like to take this opportunity to also acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, and the city of Calgary that is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. That being said, we are very happy, as Dr. Cadell was saying, to be here to celebrate the Settimana della Lingua Italiana, so Italian Language Week, and to have Dr. Konrad Eisenbichler here with us tonight. And Professor Konrad Eisenbichler is a great scholar of the Italian Renaissance, and he teaches in the Renaissance Studies program and in the Department of Italian Studies at the University of Toronto. His teaching focuses on early modern Italian literature, modern media in Europe, and on early modern ideas towards gender and sexuality, as well on Italian theater, Florentine culture, and the Renaissance. And Professor Eisenbichler is particularly interested in lay and religious confraternities, on theater, on youth culture, women, between like 1300s to 1700s. He's a very prolific author, editor, and translator. He has more than 20 books to his credit. And he has won many prizes as a scholar and has a great reputation. His books have won the American Catholic Historical Association Prize in 1999. He has the translation of Arrigo Petacci tragedy Revealed, who won the prize, the Umberto Sabba Prize in 2006. And has wrote a fantastic monograph, which is this one, which I love, which is the Sword in the Pen, Women, Politics, and Poetry in 16th Century Siena, who won the prestigious Ennio Flaiano Prize for Italian Scholarship in 2013, was also named for Outstanding Academic Title of 2013. And won many awards, including the Scaglione Publication Award by the MLA Association. For his contribution to scholarship on Italian history, literature, and culture, Professor Eisenbichler was knighted by the President of Italy at the rank of Commendatore in the Order of Merit in 2010. And in 2014, Dr. Eisenbichler received his second knighthood when he was inducted into the Cavaliere di San Marco for his contribution to his scholarship on Venetian culture, history, and literature. He's a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada and is a foreign member of the Ateneo Veneto delle Scienze. And he was awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award for the Canadian Association for Renaissance Studies. And Professor Eisenbichler has been the president of the 16th Century Society Conference, of the Canadian Society for Renaissance Studies, of the Canadian Society for Italian Studies. He's been the chair of the Toronto Renaissance Reformation Colloquium and a two-term director of the Center for Reformation and Renaissance Studies. As well as he was the president of the Federazione Giuliano-Dalmata Canadese. And his talk today, Forgotten Italians, the Julian-Dalmatian Community in Canada, it's based on his most recent book. And so we thank Dr. Eisenbichler so much for being with us this afternoon. And I give him like the word. Please, thank you so much for being here. I hope everybody wants to welcome him. If we were in person, we will give you an applause.
I can see a lot of hands moving like that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's a wonderful pleasure.
Our meeting today is going to be recorded.
Yes, one last thing is that our meeting today will be recorded, and that then our wonderful administration, Fancy Pisicoli, will also upload this presentation on our website. So you will be able to listen to it again.
And I would like to thank many, many people, but Francie, thank you so much for making these available to everybody and the technology and all the team that work with you. And of course, thank you to Professor Eisenbichler for being here with us.
Well, thank you, Francesca, Eleonora, Francie, for making this possible. This is my very first public lecture via Zoom. I'm hoping it's going to go well. Let's keep our fingers crossed. This is a topic, I'm usually known as a Renaissance scholar, but this is a topic that's been interesting me for the past 20, 30 years, the community of Giuliano-Dalmati here in Canada. And I've been working on it primarily on one or two authors, but also some of its history and some of its sociology. So what I'm presenting today is what I know about it. I did not write it out. I just did a PowerPoint presentation, which I'm going to share with you. I'm going to do share screen. And I'm going to talk, as the Italians say, a braccio, off the cuff, which means that I will probably go over time. I'll try to be as quick as I can. I'm told 45 minutes. I have 63 slides, which means 40 seconds for each slide. It's going to be more like a movie than an actual slide presentation. I see a lot of friends from Italy, from Canada, from the United States. It's so good to see you on the screen. But I'm now going to get rid of you by doing share screen. And I hope you can all be able to see the share screen. Share.
Okay.
And you're seeing the share screen, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Good. And there we go.
Yeah.
Wonder if I can actually minimize this a little bit. So, it's a Settimana della Lingua Italiana, the week of the Italian language. And usually when we think about the Italian language and all of its wonderful dialects, all very fascinating, we get this kind of a map, which is great. You get to see all the dialects. But the map and all the maps I can find basically ignore the Italian and the Italian dialects that are spoken outside the political borders of post-1947 Italy. So this is the Italy of the last 50, 60 years, and not the Italy of history. And there is Italian that is spoken by native Italian populations outside those borders, in particular in Switzerland, in Switzerland over here, and over here. Oh gosh, I'm sorry, I tell you, this is new to me. I need to move this thing back up. And along the coastline over here of Italy. Along the coastline because, there. That.
Okay.
By a population called the Giuliano-Dalmati. So who are the Giuliano-Dalmati? Where do they come from? Basically, they come from the peninsula of Istria, which is this area, the islands in the Gulf of Quarnero, which is this area. And I should add that I was born on this little island right here. And from cities along the coastline of Dalmatia, in particular the cities of Zara, which is around here, Spalato and Ragusa down here, and a few of the islands over here that are Italian speaking. There are some famous Istrians and Dalmatians whom you probably know but never thought that they were from that area. The Emperor Diocletian, Saint Jerome, who translated the Bible from Hebrew and Greek into Latin, and it's the Vulgate version that the Catholic Church still uses. Giuseppe Tartini, a very famous composer of the 17th, 18th century. Niccolò Tommaseo, who actually wrote an Italian dictionary. He's from Sebenico. Some actresses, such as Irma Grammatica, a very important musician, composer, Luigi Dalla Piccola, who is famous for his 12-tone music, together with Strindberg and Weber, no, not Weber, Strindberg anyway. Olympic athletes such as Agostino Straulino, who was born in my hometown of Lusimpiccolo. Enzo Bettiza, who's a very famous writer in Italy. Franco Luzzardo, whose liquor you might already have drunk. He makes very good maraschino and things like that. Race car driver, Mario Andretti. Actress, Laura Antonelli, who was very famous in the 60s and 70s for soft porn films. She was one of the great seductresses of Italian cinema. Ottavio Missoni, the fashion designer, who was also an Olympic hurdler. And Giuliano-Dalmati have brought, are part of the Italian community here in Canada, but they're different from the standard Italian community that we find in Canada because they're not economic immigrants or emigrants. They are in fact political refugees. They're exiles from their homeland. Now, when I say that they're exiles and refugees, somebody's got their microphone open and needs to shut it off.
Okay.
I say this, that they're refugees and immigrants, because of the burden of history that has fallen upon them. And in the next few moments, I'm going to talk a little bit about that burden of history. Istria and Dalmatia were part of the ancient Roman Empire for about 7 centuries, or 7 or 8 centuries, from the 2nd century BC to the 5th century of our common era. And you can find wonderful Roman ruins throughout Istria and Dalmatia. What I'm showing you here is the very well preserved Roman arena, the amphitheater in Pola, which is still being used for spectacles. And still in Pola, the Temple of Augustus in downtown, in the main piazza in Pola. Then Istria and Dalmatia were for some time part of the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, after the fall of Rome. And then for several centuries under the Frankish Empire. So from the 6th to the 11th century, for about 500 years, they were in that circle of influence. I'm showing you this incredible mosaics in the Basilica of Parenzo, a town halfway down the coast of Istria. If you ever get a chance of seeing them, they're absolutely splendid with the alabaster columns, with the gold leaf mosaics, with the mother of pearl that reflects the sunlight as it comes in. It's really stupendous. You can go to Parenzo directly by a motorboat from Venice. Then for about 700 years, the area was part of the Venetian Republic, the Stato di Mar of the Venetian Republic. And we find the Lion of St. Mark all over this area in all sorts of civic monuments. What I'm showing you is the gate to the land, to the mainland, the Porta di Terraferma, built in Zara by Michele San Michele back in 1537. But you'll find the Lion of St. Mark everywhere in this area. Then for about 5 years, it was part of France, believe it or not, as part of Emperor Napoleon's empire, as the Illyrian provinces. Illyria is another name for Dalmatia. We find Shakespeare uses the term Illyria when referring to Dalmatia. The Tempest is set in Illyria, for example, Shakespeare's play. And then for about 100 years, it was part of Austria, the Austrian Empire, governed from Vienna. And one of the things I find really interesting is in this map, Austrian map of Istria, which is labeled Österreichische Riviera, you'll notice that Istria is written in German, Istrian, but the names of the cities are all written in Italian. The language spoken in the area, although German was an official language, but the language spoken was, as it always has been, the Italian language in its Venetian dialect form. And then it became part of Italy for 20 years during the fascist regime. And it was a province of Italy called Venezia Giulia. Venezia Giulia, it's a term that comes from the fact that this was an ancient Roman province under Julius Caesar. And so they get the name Venezia Giulia from that. But then Italy lost the war, and it had to cede most of Venezia Giulia, the newly created Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. And this was part of the Italian war reparations to Yugoslavia. And this was finalized in the Treaty of Paris of 1947. So from 1945, actually, when Yugoslavia conquered the area, and to 1992, when Yugoslavia broke apart, we find that Istria, Fiume, and Dalmatia are part of this new country called the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. All that was left to Italy when the area was transferred to Yugoslavia was the city of Trieste, which is located right there, the little town of Muggia, which is right on the border, and basically the railroad line that united these two cities to mainland Italy. And today, what we knew as Istria and Dalmatia is basically divided up among 5 different countries. As I said, the little bit of Istria that is a part of the Trieste-Muggia area. There's a small arm of Istria that it was given by Yugoslavia to Slovenia so that it could have sea access. It was never historically part of Slovenia. It has now become part of Slovenia. The rest of Istria and pretty well all of Dalmatia, which are part now of Croatia. A little sea access here that is part of Bosnia-Herzegovina, and the rest, which is part of Croatia, and then this part, which is Montenegro. And over here we have Albania. So Istria and Dalmatia, which were, since the Venetian area, the Roman area, basically part of one country, are now part of 5 countries. It's all because of World War II and its aftermath. In 1943-45, as the war was coming to an end, Italy surrendered in 43 and switched sides, and the war ended in 45. As soon as Italy surrendered and switched sides in September of 43, the Yugoslav communist partisans grabbed all they could of Istria, the city of Zara in Dalmatia, the city of Fiume, and even the city of Trieste. And they basically, on the idea that possession is 9/10 of the law. So they conquered it because Tito, the communist Yugoslav partisan leader, wanted those territories for the new country that he was putting together. The moment that the partisans took control of the land, they immediately began a campaign of violence against the local Italian population that had been there since time immemorial. Admittedly, some people, some Italians had moved into the area when the area had become part of Italy in the wake of World War I. But there had been a very significant Italian population throughout Istria and Dalmatia for centuries. So the violence against the Italian population has sometimes been called an ethnic cleansing because it actually led to the flight of Italians from the area. We'll say a few things in a minute. But a lot of Italians were arrested. There were summary trials where they were charged with being enemies of the people. nemici del popolo, and executed. I'm showing you a scene from the film Rosso Istria, translated into English as Red Land, that came out, I think in 2019 or 2018. And it's the story of Norma Cossetto, a young woman from Istria who was a student, a university student in Padua, writing a thesis on Istria. She was arrested, found guilty, and guilty of being an enemy of the people. And after suffering a lot of torture and rape, was executed by being thrown into one of the big crevices, foiba, the big sinkholes that we find throughout Istria. Istria is a mountainous region of karst stone, which means that it has a lot of porous holes, big caves that sort of fall hundreds of meters into the depth. And these people were killed by being thrown into these holes. When the partisans left, the local administration was able to pull some of the dead people out, some of the cadavers, and the story became known. It was a tragic, tragic event that scared a lot of people. And so the Italians started to flee, what we now call the exodus of the Italian population. They fled any way they could. Basically, they put their belongings in a cart, they carried it by hand, they took the bus, they took a car, and they went across the border into the Allied, English-American Allied control areas of Istria, primarily Trieste, and then into Italy. Some of them actually fled by rowing their boats or sailing across the Adriatic. And you can see from this image of this family fleeing with a cart that on the houses in the towns, the partisans had written slogans. The WW that you see on the wall here is the Italian short form for the word viva, long live. So here we see long live Tito, the communist partisan leader at the time, and then dictator president of Yugoslavia. The CPL that you see there is the Committee for Popular Liberation. On the whole, the Comitati Popolari di Liberazione were communist, not all of them, but for the most part they were. And so these slogans were painted on the walls. So you can see here two of them, another one over here just starting, another one over here. And when the W is upside down, it means down with. And so you would see things like an upside W with words like fascisti, down with fascisti, or down with Italians, and things like that. So the Italian population obviously got scared, and many fled for their life. Once the Treaty of Paris was signed in February of 1947, the Italians who were still in the area were given the possibility of opting for Italy and legally abandoning the area. There was a major effort to take the Italians from Istria to Italy in February of 1947 from the port city of Pola that I mentioned to you earlier. And that exodus from Pola, not Poland, sorry about that slip. The exodus from Pola in February of 47 has become a mythical example of the flight of Italians from Istria. You can see the horse-drawn carts in front of the arena, the Roman amphitheater. You can see the people boarding the ship. It had actually snowed the night before when people were boarding. And you can see the families, even with infant children, the mothers and children escaping. I love this image of a family group about to leave. I'm fascinated by the looks in their faces, this family grouping over here, the little children all bundled up, the old mothers with baby in arms, this sort of very straight-faced woman, this sort of curious young man over here. And I can't keep my eyes off this sort of hoodie guy over here. I don't know what was going on with him, but he looks like something out of the early 2000s and not 1947. But on a more serious note, cities like Fiume lost 54,000 out of its 60,000 inhabitants. That's 90% of the population left. Pola, 94% left, 32,000 out of 34,000. Zara, 95% left. Capodistria, 93%. Rovigno, 80% left. All in all, about 350,000 people, that's a rough estimate, left Istria. And today, this peninsula and Dalmatia have been repopulated, obviously, with people from mainland Yugoslavia, so that the Italians that are left in the area at this point are only about 30,000. In other words, 10% of the original population. Where did they go? Well, they left as refugees and they had nowhere to go. So the Italian government set up refugee camps all over Italy, some of 119, in fact. Some of them were previously used, camps that were previously used as prisoner of war camps for during World War II. Others instead were empty buildings that Italy had and could use, such as military barracks. The people who left all really wanted to stay together. They were begging the Italian government to allow them to settle empty areas of Italy, perhaps in the northeast, so that they could rebuild their lost towns, sort of create a new Pola or a new Zara. But the Italian government was afraid of having too many of these refugees in one single spot because they would have a lot of political power. So it purposely scattered them throughout the peninsula. And in fact, one of the largest camps that Italy set up, and one of the largest populations of Italian refugees, aside from Trieste, which is right here on the border, is in fact at the opposite end of Italy altogether, in Fertilia, which was a nothing little town in 1947, and then has become a major center today, a major population center and center of Giuliano-Dalmata culture. They even have a museum of Julian-Dalmatian culture in Fertilia. Life in the refugee camps was, as you might expect, difficult. There was a lot of socializing going on because they were people from the same towns, all of them refugees. So there was a bonding going on. And we have lots of wonderful stories of young men and women meeting each other, getting married and emigrating together, living together, setting up families. So there were good positive points about it, but they were living in shacks and baracconi. And if they were living in barracks, you can see from the photo, the image on the right, that the quarters that were given to the refugees were very, very small. These two women are sharing a kitchen, but it's just barely big enough for them. So where can they go? Where can they go back to? This is a book that has recently been published. Italian authors from Istria, Fiume, and Dalmatia from the 1900s and the 2000s. What I find interesting in this collection of writings about these Julian-Dalmatian writers is that they're all people in Istria or in Italy. It seems as if the refugees that eventually settled in Italy, or those people who remained in Istria and Dalmatia, generally, not always, but generally seem to forget that a lot of Italians left Italy. And I'll speak about that in a minute. But before that, I want to point out that return to Istria and Dalmatia was pretty well impossible in the early years. And that's because those who left were deemed to be Italians. And so they had a right to be in Italy, but they had no legal right to be in Yugoslavia. So once they opted to remain Italian and left for Italy, they were foreigners who could not go back to Yugoslavia. Those who left were deemed to be fascists, assumed to be fascists. And so communist Yugoslavia did not want fascists back. And in fact, if they were not deemed to be fascists, they were deemed to be traitors to what was then called the workers' paradise. And that was a phrase that was constantly used to describe Yugoslavia, communist Yugoslavia, il paradiso dei lavoratori. So for those Italians who left, if they wanted to return, if they had changed their mind, or if they wanted to return to see their relatives who were still behind, it was dangerous. They were facing possible arrest, and if they were arrested, certainly jail time, and God forbid, possible execution. They were also going back from what was now the Republic of Italy, a democratic republic since 1947, into a communist dictatorship. And that was a problem. They were also going back to an area that was no longer populated by Italians. Yes, they could go back to their family members who had remained behind, but on the whole, the towns had been repopulated with Slavic populations from mainland Yugoslavia. And they were going back into an area that was no longer Italian speaking, but was speaking Serbo-Croatian, a language that most of them did not speak. And they were going back to a geography and to a population that had been renamed. The city of Fiume had been renamed Rijeka, which is the literal translation of Fiume, which means river, into Serbo-Croatian, which is the word for river in the Serbian and Croatian is Rijeka. The city of Capodistria was renamed Koper. And people like my mom, whose baptismal name is Giovanna, were renamed Ivanka. And I have my mom's work permit from 1947-48. And she is listed there as Ivanka Martinolic, not Giovanna. So as I said, most of them stayed in Italy, but many had to leave because Italy, in the wake of World War II, was basically destroyed economically, physically. The population was suffering. There was no work, no hope for the future. So many refugees chose to emigrate. Many went, some came to Canada, many went to the United States, some went to Venezuela, Brazil, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, and Australia. Those were the major areas of emigration. And those who left refer to this as their second exodus, secondo esodo, because not only were they forced to leave their hometowns in Istria and Dalmatia, but they were also obliged to leave Italy because there was nothing for them in Italy. The major transatlantic exodus was carried out on two ships, the Saturnia and the Vulcania, which belonged to the Kozulic line. The Kozulic is a family of ship owners, originally from Lucin Piccolo, my hometown on the island of Lucin. They then, during the Italian regime, they set up shipbuilding industries in Trieste, in Genoa, and they were instrumental in assisting the refugees to emigrate across the Atlantic to the United States, Canada, Australia, and South America. Now, most of these refugees who had escaped basically without documents, without much legal documentation from Istria and Dalmatia, had no passport. So the International Refugee Organization, which still exists, the IRO, started to issue them identity papers, registration certificates with the IRO that these people could use to emigrate in lieu of a passport. And here we see this beautiful registration certificate that I found just the other day by Googling. It's issued in Gorizia, which is on the border right now between Italy and Slovenia. In the wake of World War II, Gorizia was divided in half, just like the city of Berlin, and half of it was given to Italy and half of it to Slovenia. Berlin has now been reunited in a united Germany, but Gorizia still remains a divided city between two countries, Italy and Slovenia. It's issued on the 22nd of November, 1949 in Gorizia to Amedeo Rusic, who was born in Fiume on the 11th of July, 1921. So at a time when Fiume was an Italian city. But notice that it says that his nationality is undetermined. And he was currently domiciled at 1949 in this town, Fiume Veneto, which is in Friuli, just south of Pordenone. And he signs his name here, and the officer signs the name there. And the refugee organization stamps it. Good-looking young man, 28 years old. As I said, some of these refugees came to Canada. They landed at Pier 21. And if you have an occasion to get to Halifax, I would really recommend that you go and visit Pier 21. It is a wonderful museum of Canadian immigration where people from all over Europe passed in the years after World War II. They all came through Pier 21 to enter Canada. The fellow that I mentioned earlier, Amedeo Rusic, I actually Googled him and discovered that he actually emigrated to Canada. He became a Canadian citizen, and he's listed in the voters list in Essex County in Ontario. He died in 1981 at the age of 60 in Windsor, Ontario, and was survived by his wife, Ilde, and their 3 children. So that was a nice coincidence that I found his registration certificate and was able to locate him here in Canada. A lot came to Canada in the late 40s, early 50s, all the way up to the early 1960s. And they started a new life for themselves. This is a family of Giuliano-Dalmati, a rather extended family of Giuliano-Dalmati, but I photographed one of our club's picnics a couple of years ago. I must admit, I forget their last name now. The club Giuliano-Dalmato in Toronto was founded in 1967. In the first years of our immigration, the population was busy getting a job, setting up a family, getting a house, and then quickly they started to socialize. So the very first association of Giuliano-Dalmati in Canada is the Toronto Club, founded in 1967. The second one was founded in Chatham, Ontario in 1988, 21 years later. It is still a very large community of Istriani. Most of them came to southwestern Ontario in the 1950s as a group migration because the farmers in the Chatham area were looking for people to work on their farms. And they sponsored a huge number of Istrians from central Istria who were farmers there and were very happy to come to Canada. So think of the kind of Mexicans, for example, who come to Canada in the summer to work in our fields and then return to Mexico. This is what the Istriani did in the 1950s, but they settled in Chatham area. The club in Toronto organized a big gathering in September of 1991 in the Labor Day weekend. They called it the Raduno Novantuno. People came from all over Canada, all over the United States. A wonderful group of women came from California. They're called the Triestina girls. The women from Trieste who had married American GIs and moved to the United States with them. And we had people from Latin America, Venezuela, Argentina, Chile, from South Africa, from Italy. And in the wake of that wonderful gathering, a number of associations were established in Canada, in Hamilton, in 92, in Montreal, in Vancouver, and in Ottawa. So a conglomerate of Giuliano-Dalmati clubs were set up. Most of them have now died, stopped being active. The only ones that are really active are Toronto and Chatham. Vancouver sometimes does, Montreal sometimes does something, but Hamilton and Vancouver and Ottawa are pretty well dormant. The club in Toronto has its own sede, its own couple of rooms, as part of the Veneto Club in Vaughan. And here's a wonderful photo from a few years back of the executive of the club. And this wonderful blanket that the women in the club put together on the occasion of the 1991 Raduno. It has all the symbols of the cities in Istria, Dalmatian. It has the Italian flag on the top left, the Canadian flag at the top right, as if to join them all together. The Toronto Club has a number of activities over the year. It organizes picnics, dinner dances, exhibitions, book presentations, and the various clubs and the Federation of Clubs have put up plaques. The Federation put up a wonderful plaque at the Pier 21 Museum in Halifax. The Chatham group actually imported a rock from Istria and placed it in a park in Chatham with a plaque. And we in Toronto put a plaque that has the outline of Istria and Dalmatia on one of the columns of the Columbus Center in Toronto. The contributions that the population made to Canada are quite extensive. They came as workers, primarily to work on the railroads in Canada, in the forests, in the mines, in the factories. That was most of the Giuliano-Dalmati went into that field of work. But some of them came to Canada and became entrepreneurs. And I've just listed a few names that you might recognize. One of the biggest names is Sergio Marchionne, who's Giuliano-Dalmata on his mother's side, came to Canada, educated in Canada, and became, as you all know, the head of Fiat Chrysler Corporation. Another one is Luigi Russignan, who was known in his hometown in Istria as Barzula, and he's the owner of Barzula Coffee, which is everywhere in Ontario. I don't know if you have it in Calgary or in British Columbia, but it's one of the big coffee firms in Canada. The younger people and the women in the audience will certainly know Frank Poskan, who is the inventor, owner, president of MAC Cosmetics. Here in Toronto, Benny Pecota, who set up a wonderful meat industry, and Vito Batelic, who set up a tool-making factory. and many, many more. There are writers and journalists such as Claudio Antonelli. I'll speak about him in a minute. Mario Giuliani, I'll say more about him. Caterina Edwards, Gianni Angelo Grohovac, Jenny Gunn. I'll talk about them in a minute. Artists, I'll talk about them as well. Vittorio Fiorucci, Silvia Pecota. University professors such as Diego Bastianutti, who's listening to us, myself, Gabriele Erasmi, who taught at McMaster, Carlo Fonda, now deceased, who used to teach at Concordia, Sandra Parmigiani, who teaches at Guelph, Alexander Stojanovic, who's at Mount Royal University in Calgary. Some of these people, some of these writers and artists are part of the book that I just published last year with the University of Toronto Press, entitled Forgotten Italians. If you're interested in the book, what you might want to do is you just need to put down the phrase Forgotten Italians in Google, and you'll immediately get to the University of Toronto Press website, and you can order it through their website for delivery at home. It's a wonderful book with a lot of, I wrote the introduction, but a wonderful group of people wrote excellent articles in there that cover quite a number of aspects of the Giuliano-Dalmati presence in Canada and their contribution to our new country. Now, one of the first ones to come was Mario Giuliani, born in Pisino d'Istria in 1885, when it was still part of Austria, died in Montreal in 1964. He is not a refugee. He came to Canada in 1936. Some people say he came as a fascist spy. The jury is still out on that. But he was one of the Italians that were arrested in 1943. 1940. He was arrested when Italy joined the war, and Canada was already at war. So he and many other Italians were deemed to be foreign enemies and were rounded up and placed in internment camps. Giuliani spent 3 years in the internment camp in Petawawa. And as a result of that, he wrote a book in French, because he was active in French, entitled La Ville sans Femme, which talks about life. It's a semi-autobiographical book, which talks about life in the refugee camp. It is important for us Italians in Canada because it talks about his experience, the Italians' experience, but it's important for all foreign nationals who were interned, the Germans and the Japanese as well, because it's an internment experience that has been now put into a literary frame as an experience. He published a book in 1945 in French in Montreal, and then quickly translated it into Italian as La città senza donne in 1946. And just a few years back, it was translated into English by Antonino Mazza, The City Without Women. Another important journalist was Gianni Angelo Grohovac, who was born in Fiume in 1926 and died in Tiny Township, Ontario in 1988. That's a little resort on Lake Huron. He lived his entire life in Toronto, and he was life in Canada in Toronto. And he was very, very active with the Italian community, not only as a journalist, but also as a community organizer. He wrote several books, and one of them is this volume called To Friuli, From Canada with Love, which is a description of Canada's contribution to Friuli after that terrible quake that hit the region in 1976, if I remember correctly. He also had a radio show where he, for half an hour every week on Wednesdays, he would speak on the Italian radio station CHIN, and he put together some of his radio talks into a volume entitled E con rispetto parlando al microfono Gianni Angelo Grohovac. He wrote a collection of poetry in Fiuman dialect entitled Per ricordar le cose che ricordo. And that's the volume that I've spent a lot of my research on. I just love the poetry he wrote. And he wrote a book about his experience in his first year in Canada, when he came as a refugee with the IRO, and by contract had to work with the Canadian National Railroad, laying tracks in Muskoka in winter. And he wrote a semi-autobiographical novel called Strada Bianca that talks about that experience. It, too, is a testament to the Italian experience in Canada, just like the Ville sans femme, the book by Giuliani. I don't know if there are two poems of Grohovac that I wanted to read to you so that you could hear the dialect, but also to get a feel for the kind of tone that he had. I'm going to skip the one on profughi because I think we're running out of time, but I'll read the one about the birth of his second son. Grohovac was married, his first son was born in Venice. The second one was born in Toronto, John Grohovac Jr., who may be listening in on us today. John Grohovac Jr. was born in Toronto, and his father in this poem thinks about what that means to him, to the father. He mentions a number of places, place names from the native city of Fiume, where John Grohovac Sr. was born. And then he thinks about his son. I'll read that poem so you can hear a little bit of the dialect. Prima che il mondo crollasse per la guerra, i Grohovac nasceva in Val Scurigne, in Belvedere, Cossala o Montegua, in Città Vecchia o Pelin oppure in Braida. A Zabet gli era nato un mio cugino. Del nonno mio la cuna si Adrenova. Emilio invece è nato in riva al mare, sulla laguna però, e se veneziano. Sti giorni invece, il 13 settembre, un tulso coi occhi del Quarnero è il fio che è nato qua, a Toronto, lontan da Fiume e da Cossala nostra, dove che i Grohovac di solito nasceva, prima che il mondo crollasse per la guerra. Tanti anni fa, il destino ha preparato questa congiura. Ma cosa ti vuol fare? Fora de casa mi è nato un fio che porterà per sempre il nome mio. Sul volto le sembianze del Quarnero. Nel cor che darò me la nostra fiamma. Dell'anima assicura la sua mamma. E Fiume per procura che ha dato la forza di combattere chi che sia non conoscesse la guerra, storia e geografia. Guardelo sto muletto nella cuna. E se la bella copia di suo pare e non gappase in giro per la terra finché non torna a casa in Belvedere. Guardelo sto muletto, quando il piange è un pianto zitto, quasi è un lamento, ma forse mi sogno, sarà per le panuzze. Ma il pianto suo mi fa pensare a ti, fiume dei Grohovac di un tempo, a ti che ti dà un nuovo cittadino, anche se nato lontano dal molo lungo, e se fiuman de Marca, de Zecchin. Another wonderful immigrant is Vittorio Fiorucci, who was born in Zara in 1932 and he died in 2008 in Montreal. He was a graphic artist who won a lot of prizes in Quebec. He lived his whole life in Montreal and Quebec and was a Quebecois independentist. He did a lot of posters for various things. I love these two. Poster on the government's campaign to forestate, to reforest the region. Ne coupez pas les arbres. And the other one, there was a campaign again mounted by the Quebec government to attract tourism to Quebec. Visitez le nouveau Québec. Quebec, in other words, that does not have the priests in charge. This is the figure of a priest that with the head cut off. But you'll all remember him because he's the creator of Victor, the little mascot that we see in the Juste pour Rire, Just for Laugh shows. So I want you all, every time you see this little green gnome, to remember Vittorio, profugo, a refugee from Zara. Now, Diego Bastianutti is with us today. He's born in 1939 in Fiume. He was a professor at Queen's University. He's published now in his retirement quite a number of volumes of poetry. He lives in Vancouver. His first two books, Il Punto Caduto and La Barca in Secco, are very strongly influenced by his experience of being a refugee from Fiume. And I particularly like one poem, the poem that gives the title to the first book, Il Punto Caduto. And if I may now, I would like to ask Diego Bastianutti to read his poem for us. Diego, you'll have to unmute your microphone. Can you do it?
Sì, mi sentite? Mi sentite?
Yes, we can hear you.
La leggo, allora?
Yes.
Il punto caduto. Se capii, non ricordo, se pensai nemmeno. Solo so che anch'io volli alla vita partecipare. Queste le regole mi dissero, questa la matrice, seguile e sarai felice. Anch'io fatto avrei la mia maglia e mi misi a sferruzzare. Punto su punto, fila su fila, mai tolsi gli occhi. Venne il giorno che nella maglia mia mi avvolsi, ma vedi caso, tutta si sfilò, che chissà come, chissà quando, un punto cadde.
Thank you, Diego.
That's
That punto, that stitch that fell is an echo of the youth, the childhood that fell apart in Fiume. That's the way I see it anyway. Another wonderful writer is Caterina Edwards, who is not herself a refugee. She's born in Earls Barton, United Kingdom. Her mother is from the same island as I am, the island of Lucene. Caterina is a very recognized Canadian, Italian-Canadian writer with several books to her credit and prizes. One of her latest books is Finding Rosa, which is about her mother as she grows old and develops dementia. But the first book I read by her was Island of the Nightingales, which is a collection of short stories. One of the short stories, collection of short stories centered about women, Italian women's experience in Canada. One of the short stories is the one that gives the title to the book, Island of the Nightingales, and it talks about a young teenage girl in her late teens who goes back to Europe, to Dalmatia, to the island of Lucene, to spend the summer there. And I had transcribed just the opening paragraph because I think it's so nice. And if Caterina would read it, I'd be very, very thankful.
Sure, I'm just, okay, there. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I escaped to the island. I ran away from the confusion, the murkiness of my life to the simplicity of sun and sea. Or so I told myself. It was the thing to do then, in the early 1970s. You left home, you escaped to find or lose yourself. My friends backpacked across Europe. They traveled the overland route to Afghanistan or did drugs on a beach in Goa. They joined cults in Oregon or communities in the Kootenai Valley. I claimed my search led me to Lucino, the long, thin island parallel to the Dalmatian coast that was once the favorite resort of the Habsburgs and the biggest island in the Adriatic, until the Romans dug a channel that divided it into two. I suggested that my arrival on those rocky shores sprang from some mysterious but inspired impulse, while, actually, Lucino was my mother's hometown. The Lanzas had lived there for 4 centuries before they were exiled, picked up by a raging wind and blown across the world, to Australia and Canada, to America and Italy. There.
Thank you, Caterina.
Thanks.
One of the reasons I really like that short story is because I too was sent to Lucino by my mom and dad when I was in my late teens, when I was 18, and then again when I was in my early 20s. And I kept going back. But a lot of the experiences that Caterina talks about, being the child of refugees who then goes back to the hometown, the family's hometown, and I was born in Lucino, echo very strongly with me. Another wonderful contributor is Silvia Pecota, the daughter of the Benny Pecota I mentioned earlier. Silvia is an artist in various media who has won prizes. She has gone on several occasions to visit our troops in Afghanistan as a photographer. And you see her there with her camera in hand. She has done wonderful photographs. There was a wonderful exhibition of her photographs of boxers that she did back a few years ago. She's also an artist that has depicted our military. This is the sort of work that she does. And one of her works is the engraving on the Afghan and Peacemakers Memorial Cenotaph in Windsor. And there's a copy of it as well in Kabul, I believe, in Afghanistan. So Sylvia is a fascinating artist and somebody to keep an eye on. Jenny Gunn, living in Vancouver, born in Trieste, is a very, very productive writer with a lot of books about various different aspects of her youth. Sorry, I'm getting interrupted by just got interrupted by my mom, sorry. Another writer is Claudio Antonelli, born in Pisino d'Istria, a journalist. He taught at Concordia for a while. And Aldo Nazarco, who I think has joined us in this presentation, recently published a book of memories, A River of Oranges, that describes his voyage as a refugee child from Fiume to Canada. He's now living in Victoria, BC, where he spends some of his time being a radio host on the University of Victoria radio station with a music program. Margaret Antonetz, who was a member of our club here in Toronto, who wrote a lot of poetry, and eventually it was put together and published, Poesia di una Vita. And we should also not forget that there were people who came here as refugees who are from the area but have a different experience. And one of them is Miriam Frankel, a Jewish girl from Trieste. She grew up in Trieste, but she was actually born in Czechoslovakia. But she came as a baby to Trieste, grew up in Trieste, and unfortunately was part of the racist, anti-Semitic laws of Benito Mussolini. She was arrested with her family, brought to Auschwitz. She lost her entire family in Auschwitz, managed to survive, and was eventually liberated. And came with the Jewish Refugee Organization to Canada. She's now living in Toronto. My friend Rosanna Giuricin, who is listening in on us today, interviewed her and published a wonderful book that's a biography of Miriam. Miriam's name in Italy was Maddalena. Miriam is her English Jewish name. Maddalena in Italy. It's Maddalena agli occhi viola. The book was published in Italy, and it's in Italian, but it's the book about our story as Giuliano-Dalmati coming to Canada, whether we are Christian or Jewish or non-believers. So it's a rich heritage. We've made a significant contribution. We have a history that's worth preserving. How do we preserve it? Well, I think we have to identify it. I did not know about Jenny Gunn until after I published the book. We have to look for our people and identify them. We have to recognize the contribution they've made, and we need to historicize it. We need to write about it so that future generations have it. So that is my final recommendation to you, to look around, to see if you can identify Giuliano-Dalmati, recognize their contribution, and make it known. And with these words, I want to say thank you. It's been wonderful talking to you. I will stick around to answer any questions or hear any comments that you have. I will now stop sharing my screen so that we can all see each other. There we go. Thank you all.
Grazie.
Thank you so much, Professor Eisenbichler, for this very rich contribution. And I am particularly grateful for all the people who are attending. Thank you to Caterina Edwards. Thank you to all your friends. And I think we have time for questions. I apologize, I have issues with my site, so I ask also my